The rain had stopped, but the silence it left behind was wrong. It was a thick, waiting silence that smothered the village of Torin-Fell. From his window in the cramped upstairs room of the pub, Eamon listened. No birds, no distant bleating of sheep from the hills. Only the persistent drip, drip, drip of water from the eaves, and something else. A sound beneath the sound. It was a low, resonant thrum, like a cello string plucked miles away, felt more in the bones of his jaw than heard with his ears. It had started 3 days ago, the moment they breached the outer wall of the Barrow. Eamon rubbed the grit from his eyes. He was a man of carbon dating and soil stratification, a man who believed that history was written in stone and bone, not in the fearful whispers of a village huddled in the shadow of the great green mound. The locals called it Knokain Antasta, the Hill of Silence. They had warned him. Old Seamus, the publican, had polished a glass with a trembling hand, his eyes never meeting Eamon's. There are things best left buried, Professor, and the things in that hill, they ain't sleeping, they're just quiet. Eamon had dismissed it as romantic, Gaelic nonsense. The Barrow was a significant, uncatalogued tumulus, likely Bronze Age. His grant depended on what he found inside. Now he wasn't so sure. The thrumming pulsed in his temples, a migraine of sound. He'd led the dig himself. When their shovels broke through the capstone, there was no rush of stale air, no treasure, just a sudden, paralyzing cold that smelled of ozone and wet copper, and a darkness within the breach that seemed to drink the light from their headlamps. Since then, the village had begun to unravel. It started with the animals. The sheepdogs refused to go near the path to the hill, cowering in the square with their tails between their legs. Then came the insomnia.
Eamon saw them from his window, figures standing in the dark, framed in their doorways, perfectly still, all facing the dark mass of the Barrow looming against the bruised twilight sky. They were watching it, or it was watching them. Eamon grabbed his jacket. The damp wool smelled of peat smoke and something sour, something like fear. He had to check on his team. Young Finn, his most eager assistant, hadn't reported in since yesterday afternoon. He'd found Finn's notebook near the dig site. The last entry was not in Finn's neat academic hand, but a frantic, jagged scrawl. The same 2 words, over and over, gouged into the paper. So cold. Let us in. The village street was empty. The rain-slicked cobbles reflected a sickly yellow light from the few sputtering lamps. The thrumming was louder out here, a vibration that seemed to rise from the ground itself, as if the very bedrock of the county was humming a terrible, discordant tune. He found Mrs. O'Malley first. She was kneeling in the mud of the village green, her white nightgown soaked, her hands plunged deep into the wet earth as if she were digging for roots. She was rocking back and forth, muttering. "Eamon?" he called, his voice sounding thin and brittle. She didn't look up. Her muttering continued, a rhythmic, guttural chant. It wasn't Gaelic. It wasn't any language she had ever heard. It sounded like stones grinding together. He moved closer, his boots squelching in the mud. He could see her face, pale and vacant in the gloom. Her eyes were wide open, but they were milky, filmed over, seeing nothing. "It's open," she hissed, the voice not her own. It was a dry, scratching sound, like 1,000 brittle leaves blowing across pavement. "The door is open, and the house is cold. We must make it warm. We must fill the house." A shiver that had nothing to do with the damp air traced its way down Eamon's spine. He backed away slowly. "Mrs. O'Malley, Mary, you need to go inside." She ignored him. Her digging became more frantic, her fingernails scraping against a buried stone.
He left her. He told himself he would send Seamus from the pub, but he knew he wouldn't. A dreadful, isolating paranoia was settling over him. He felt it as a physical weight pressing on his chest. Don't trust them. They're already part of it. They're already open. His mind flashed to the breach, the light-swallowing darkness, the smell of copper. He walked faster, breaking into a near run, his boots splashing in the puddles. The path to the Barrow was slick with mud. The great mound hulked before him, a pregnant belly of earth against the night sky. The thrumming was so loud now it was a physical blow, vibrating in his teeth, making his vision blur at the edges. He saw the orange glow of a lantern near the excavation site. "Finn!" he shouted, relief washing over him, so potent it made him weak. "Finn, you idiot, what are you doing out here?" There was no reply, only the thrum, thrum, thrum of the hill, and a new sound, a wet, rhythmic scraping. Eamon scrambled up the muddy incline, slipping, catching himself on handfuls of wet grass. He reached the dig site. The tarpaulin covering the breach had been torn away. The lantern sat on the ground, its light casting wild, dancing shadows. Finn was there. He was inside the trench, crouched before the black, gaping hole they had made. He was naked from the waist up, his pale skin streaked with mud and something darker. He was scraping at the edges of the breach with his bare hands. His fingers were raw, bloody, the nails torn back to the quick. He was trying to make the hole wider. "Finn, my God, stop!" Eamon lunged forward, grabbing the young man's shoulder. Finn was ice cold. His muscles were rigid, hard as stone beneath his skin. He didn't stop scraping. "Finn, it's me, it's Eamon, you're hurting yourself." Slowly, agonizingly, Finn stopped. His head turned. The movement was stiff, unnatural, like a puppet's. He faced Eamon. The lantern light illuminated his features, and Eamon's breath hitched in his throat, a small, choked sound. Finn's eyes were gone. In their place were two opaque, milky white orbs, like polished quartz. A thin, dark, oily residue, the same substance he'd smelled in the tomb, was weeping from his tear ducts, staining his cheeks. His lips cracked open, peeling back from his teeth. And he spoke. The voice was not Finn's. It was a chorus, a legion of dry, ancient, and utterly starving voices, all speaking as one. "We have been waiting," it hissed, "so long. And it is so very, very cold out here." Eamon fell back, scrambling in the mud, his mind screaming a single looping word. No, 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 no. This wasn't real. It was a hypoxia-induced hallucination. Gas from the tomb. Fungal spores. "Finn, snap out of it!" he tried to shout, but the words came out as a strangled gasp. The thing wearing Finn's body tilted its head. The chorus of voices rasped again, softer now, almost conversational. "He is gone. He was the first to answer. He was so eager. He felt the cold." The thrumming from the hill seemed to intensify, and Eamon felt it synchronize with the pounding in his own chest, a dreadful shared heartbeat. "What do you want?" Eamon whispered, his hand grasping a cold, muddy rock, a weapon. The academic was gone, replaced by something primal and terrified. "Want?" The entity's face, Finn's face, contorted into a parody of confusion. The milky eyes seemed to track him, though he knew they could not see. "The house is open. The sleepers are awake, but the house is empty. It is cold." It took a stiff, jerky step out of the trench. "We need the others," it hissed. "We need the warmth. They hear us. They are listening. They are waiting for the call." A sudden, terrible understanding clicked into place in Eamon's mind.
Mrs. O'Malley in the mud, the villagers standing in their doorways, the insomnia. They weren't just watching, they were being attuned.
The thrumming was a signal, a frequency tuning their minds to this collective. "They are all doors," the chorus whispered, "just waiting to be opened." The thing in the mud took another step toward him. "You opened the first one."
Eamon threw the rock. It struck the entity square in the chest with a heavy, wet thud. The thing didn't flinch. It simply looked down at the mud splattered on its bare skin, then back up at Eamon. "You are warm," it whispered, a note of dreadful curiosity in its voice. Eamon turned and ran. He half slid, half fell down the muddy slope of the Barrow, his feet finding no purchase, his hands clawing at the earth. He landed hard on the path, the impact jarring his teeth. He didn't look back. He scrambled to his feet and sprinted toward the distant, sickly lights of Torin-Fell. The thrumming was everywhere now, a palpable pressure wave against his eardrums. But it was no longer just a sound, it was words, a torrent of whispers scratching at the inside of his skull. "So cold, so empty, let us in. The house is cold, fill the house, let us in." He clapped his hands over his ears, but it did nothing. The sound wasn't coming from outside. He burst into the village square. It was no longer empty. They were all there. Perhaps 20 figures, villagers he'd shared drinks with, nodded to in the street. They were standing in the square, clustered in the mud, all facing the same direction, all facing the path to the Barrow, all facing him. They stood perfectly still, their forms black silhouettes against the dim lamplight. "Seamus!" Eamon cried, desperate, running toward the pub. "Mary, get inside, lock your doors!" No one moved. As he got closer, he could see their faces. They were all wearing the same expression he had seen on Mrs. O'Malley, vacant, slack-jawed. Their eyes were wide, unblinking, and reflecting the weak lamplight. "Let him come," the whispers in his head grew stronger. "He is the key. He opened the door. He will fill the house." He stumbled, catching himself on the horse trough. A hand gripped his arm. It was Seamus, the publican. "Professor," Seamus's voice was a dry rattle. His grip was like iron. "Seamus, thank God, we have to barricade the pub. Something's wrong with Finn. It's the hill." Seamus's thumb dug into the muscle of Eamon's arm, the grip painful. "I know, Professor." Seamus turned his head. His eyes, too, were filmed over, milky and blind. "We've been waiting for you," Seamus said. His voice was his own, but it was hollow, devoid of life. "We all heard the call, but it wasn't clear. You were still closed." "No," Eamon tried to pull away, but the publican's strength was inhuman. "But now we see," Seamus continued, a terrible, thin smile pulling at his lips. "You brought them. You're the messenger." From across the square, the other villagers began to move. They didn't walk. They drifted, their feet shuffling through the mud, a slow, synchronized, undeniable tide of bodies. Mrs. O'Malley was with them, her hands caked in black earth. They were all converging on him. "You're warm," Seamus whispered, his milky eyes just inches from Eamon's face. The smell of peat and sour ale on his breath was gone, replaced by the sharp, metallic tang of ozone and damp, ancient stone. "You'll help us make the house warm." The thrumming in Eamon's head stopped, replaced by a single, deafening, unified command, a sound like a mountain cracking open. "Take him!" Seamus's iron grip was joined by others. Cold hands, caked with mud and grave dirt, clamped onto his arms, his jacket, his hair. He was lifted, his feet dragging uselessly through the wet cobblestones. There was no frenzy, no violence. It was a calm, methodical, terrifyingly efficient capture. He twisted, lashing out, but it was like struggling against a machine made of cold meat. They didn't even grunt. Mrs. O'Malley's faith was inches from his, her milky eyes serene, her breath smelling of copper and the tomb. One of us now, soon, warm, good. The whispers in his head were no longer a chaotic torrent. They were coalescing, finding harmony. A chilling, multi-voiced choir singing a single, dreadful note, and beneath the note, images.
Flashes, not his own. Darkness, utter, crushing, geological darkness. Pressure, the weight of centuries. A slow, cold, patient, communal dream. Waiting, sleeping, not dead, never dead. Then, a sound, a scraping, a pinprick of light. Air, noise, warmth. An intrusion, a violation, an agony. The house was breached, the choir screamed in his skull, a sound of pure, ancient rage. The sleepers are disturbed, the cold air burns. Eamon gasped, the shared alien memory so potent it felt like his own. He understood. They hadn't been waiting to be found. They'd been hiding. The tomb wasn't a tomb, it was a sanctuary. And he, Eamon, had ripped the door open and let the world in. Now, they were coming out. The procession moved, carrying him from the square. They were taking him back to the hill. The thrumming from the Barrow was a bass note of triumph, a vibration that shook his very skeleton. He tried to focus his mind, to hold on to himself. My name is Eamon Burke. I am a professor of archaeology. I was born in Dublin. My mother's name is... The thought dissolved, like ink in water. The cold was seeping into him. It wasn't just a physical sensation, it was a mental one, an erasure. The cold was pushing his own thoughts aside, making room for theirs. So much noise, so much light. We must make it quiet again. We must make it dark. We must fill the houses with us. All the warm, chattering, noisy houses. He looked at the faces of the villagers carrying him. Seamus, Mary, young Donald from the post office. Their bodies were just vessels, empty rooms being filled by a cold, ancient, and terrified intelligence. A swarm. They reached the base of the Barrow. The path was slick, but their feet were sure. They moved with a shared, unearthly grace. At the top of the slope, by the lantern-lit breach, the thing that had been Finn was waiting. It stood perfectly still, its naked, mud-streaked chest unmoving. It wasn't breathing. It didn't need to.
When it saw the procession, it lifted its arms, the palms facing outward, a gesture of terrible welcome. The villagers dragged Eamon through the mud, depositing him at the edge of the trench, at the thing's feet. He lay panting, his limbs heavy and numb, the cold having seeped deep into his muscles. He looked from the milky-eyed faces of the villagers to the milky-eyed face of his former assistant. You don't understand, Eamon choked, his last desperate attempt at reason. The world, it's not cold. It's you. You're the cold. The thing that was Finn tilted its head, considering this. The chorus of voices spoke from its mouth, no longer a hiss, but a clear, resonant, and chillingly curious sound. We were one. A quiet house. You broke the seal. You let the out there in. It hurts. It is bright and loud. It knelt, bringing its face close to Eamon's. The smell of ozone was overwhelming.
We must make it quiet again. We will fill all the warm, noisy houses. And you were the first to hear us, the first to answer, even if you did not know it. You are the key." The villagers behind him pressed closer, a silent, expectant wall of flesh. "It is only fair," the chorus whispered. "You opened the door." The milky eyes stared into his. Eamon felt the last of his own will begin to fray. The cold, immense pressure of the collective mind pressing in, demanding entry. "Now you will be the first to help us close it." The thing that was Finn reached out a bloody, raw-nailed hand, not to grab him, but to touch his forehead. A gesture of cold benediction. And as its icy fingers made contact, Eamon's world dissolved, not into darkness, but into a deafening, blinding, silent cold. It was not a joining, it was an eviction. The moment the icy fingers touched his skin, the world Eamon knew was ripped away. The thrum, thrum, thrum vanished, replaced by a silence so profound it was a physical weight, crushing the air from his lungs.
The sight of the milky-eyed villagers, the sputtering lantern, the black maw of the Barrow, all dissolved into a blinding, featureless expanse of white-gray nothing. He was adrift. No, he was being pulled. Quiet. Good. Quiet. The thought was not his own. It was a consensus, a sigh of relief from a million dry throats. The cold was inside him now, a numbing, crystalline structure growing in his mind. It moved with a terrible, slow intelligence. It found a memory. Eamon as a child, running on a beach, the sharp, warm smell of salt and sun on his skin. The cold touched it. The memory froze. The warmth vanished. The sound of the gulls went silent. The image fractured and turned to gray-white frost. "Loud, noisy, bad," the chorus whispered, and the frozen memory shattered, dissolving into the silent gray void. "No," Eamon's consciousness screamed, a soundless, terrified pulse. "That's mine." Ours now. Quiet now. The cold moved on. It found his first kiss, a messy, fumbling, wonderfully warm moment in the back of a library. The cold smothered it, froze it, shattered it. It found his pride at his graduation, the smell of old paper and dust in his office, the taste of whiskey shared with a friend. One by one, his life was being dismantled. The cold was not destroying his memories, it was erasing the warmth from them, leaving behind only sterile, silent, empty facts. It was cataloging his life and filing it away into the vast, cold emptiness of their collective. He felt them, the others, not just the villagers, millions, a sea of minds, all dormant, all still, all waiting. They had been dreaming in the dark for millennia, a single, unified consciousness. They were not evil, they were not malicious, they were simply cold. And the warmth of his individual, chaotic, noisy mind was a profound agony to them. He was a stone dropped into a frozen lake, and they were rising up, not to drown him, but to freeze him solid, to make him part of the ice. So much, so much me. It hurts, it burns. The collective mind winced. Join, be quiet, be one. Be house. He was losing his edges. The I that was Eamon Burke was thinning out, his thoughts stretching, becoming sluggish and pale. The cold was in his core. He could feel his own limbs, far away, lying in the mud, but they were no longer his. They were just meat. The thing in the mud, the vessel that was Finn, was still kneeling over him. Through the gray fog, Eamon could dimly perceive that its hand was still on his forehead. It was a siphon, a conduit, draining the him out and pouring the us in.
A final, desperate, primal instinct flared up, the will to live, the sheer, irrational, warm selfishness of being alive. No! He fought, not with his limbs, but with his mind. He grabbed one last, bright memory, a trivial one, but his. The smell of frying bacon on a Sunday morning. He held on to it, he blazed it, focusing all his remaining self into that single, warm, greasy, wonderful sensation. Bacon, my bacon, frying. I am frying bacon. I am hungry. The collective mind recoiled. Burning, it shrieked in his head. It burns, the noise. The sensation was so foreign, so individual, so alive, that it was like acid to them. The gray fog in his mind fractured. He gasped, a real physical gasp that sucked in wet, muddy air. His eyes snapped open. He was back. He was in the mud. The villagers were all around him, a silent ring of milky-eyed statues. The thing that was Finn was recoiled, its hand snatched back from his forehead, as if it had been burned. No! It was hissing, a dry, furious, terrified sound, like 1,000 snakes. It burns, the chorus of voices rasped from Finn's mouth. The I is too loud. It is wrong. It is hot. Eamon scrambled backwards, crab-walking in the mud, his mind his own, but shaking, brittle, scarred by the absolute cold. The villagers took a single, synchronized step toward him. Their faces, which had been vacant, were now contorted. Not with anger, but with a kind of pained confusion, as if his very existence was an intolerable noise. He is not a house, Seamus's hollow voice stated, his head tilted. He is a fire. Quench it, the single, unified command echoed in the square. Quench the fire. Make it cold. They didn't just walk this time, they lunged. He was a target, a lone, warm singularity in a universe of absolute zero. The villagers lunged, but it was not the chaotic rush of an angry mob. It was a synchronized, multi-limbed attack, like the legs of a single, massive spider. Cold, muddy hands grabbed his ankles, his wrists, his coat. He was pulled down, his face smashing into the wet, cold earth. The smell of ozone and copper filled his nostrils. He was being buried. They were piling on top of him, a mass of cold, unfeeling bodies. Seamus's milky-eyed face was pressed against his, whispering. Quiet, 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 the hollow voice rattled, in time with the chorus in his head. The cold was no longer seeping, it was flooding in. The gray fog was returning, smothering his thoughts. He felt his consciousness begin to dim, his limbs grow heavy and unresponsive. It is better this way. It is rest. No. He wouldn't be erased. He wouldn't become a room for them. With the last of his strength, he fought back, not with his muscles, but with his mind. He didn't just think of the bacon, he became the bacon. He unleashed his life. He screamed, a raw, wordless sound, but in his mind, he projected everything, a symphony of noise.
His first day at university, the chaotic clatter of the dining hall, the smell of coffee, the heat of a bad argument, the joy of a problem solved, the pain of a broken arm, the lust for a fellow student, the sting of failure, the pride of his first publication. He threw the messy, chaotic, vibrant, hot garbage of his entire life at them. It was like setting off a bomb. The collective shrieked. The sound in his head was so loud it was white, a blade of pure psychic agony. Ah, the fire, the noise, it burns us, it burns! The bodies on top of him convulsed. The villagers recoiled, scrambling backward, falling over each other in the mud. They clutched their heads, their own heads, their milky eyes wide with a pain that was not their own, but the collective's.
Eamon burst free, gasping, covered in mud. He staggered to his feet. They had reformed their circle, but they were keeping their distance. They were afraid of him. "He is wrong," Mrs. O'Malley hissed, her body trembling. "He is broken. He is not a house. He is a furnace." "Do not let it near the house!" The command in their minds was pure, unadulterated panic. "It will warm the sleepers. It will burn the quiet." Eamon's mind, reeling, grabbed onto that. It will warm the sleepers. He was a weapon. They were terrified of his warmth, his life, his individuality. And the source of their power, the thing they were protecting, was the breach, the Barrow, the house. A terrible, desperate, insane idea was born. He looked at the ring of cold, waiting faces. He looked up the muddy path to the dark, thrumming hill. He looked at the thing that was Finn, standing guard by the black hole, its arms now crossed over its chest, a gesture of defense. They wanted to quench him. They wanted to make him cold. He would be the fire. He would bring the heat. "You want me?" Eamon spat, his voice trembling but defiant. He tasted mud and copper. "You want to make me quiet?"
He took a step, not away from them, but toward them, toward the path. The villagers flinched as one. "Get him!" Eamon roared, but not at them. He was roaring at himself, at the terrified academic cowering inside. He charged. He ran straight at the line of villagers blocking the path to the Barrow. They surged forward, hands outstretched, a wall of cold flesh. "Stop the fire." "My mother's name is Ifa," he screamed, the memory blazing in his mind. "We lived at number 12, Rathgar. She made soda bread." He slammed into Seamus. The moment his warm memory, his self, touched the publican's cold vessel, Seamus reeled back as if he'd been electrocuted, smoke rising from his damp coat, a smell of ozone, and something cooking. Eamon was through. He scrambled up the muddy path, his feet slipping, his lungs burning. Behind him, he heard them, a wet, sloppy, synchronized pursuit. They were coming, their fear momentarily overcome by the collective's command. Do not let him reach the breach. He was faster than them. Their movements were stiff, unnatural, but they were relentless. He reached the summit. The lantern still sat there, its light flickering, and the thing that was Finn stood before the hole. "You are not allowed," the chorus of voices stated, flat and cold. It raised its bloody hands. "This is a quiet house. You are noise." "I am Eamon Burke," he gasped, his heart feeling like it would explode. He focused, projecting again, shouting his memories. I am a problem." He charged the last few feet. The thing that was Finn met his charge. It was impossibly strong. Its icy hands clamped onto his shoulders, its grip like a steel vice. The cold was absolute, a void that threatened to extinguish his mind in a second. "Die. Be quiet," it whispered, right into his soul. Eamon looked past it, into the black, rectangular hole in the earth, the source, the heart of the cold. He had one last memory, one last spark. He let the cold in. He let it almost take him. And in that final second, as his vision grayed and his thoughts froze, he pushed all his warmth, all his life, all his not at the thing holding him, but past it. He screamed it into the darkness of the tomb. "Let me in!" The thrumming stopped. The silence that followed was not the cold, waiting silence from before. It was a dead, absolute vacuum. The thing holding him froze. Its milky eyes widened, not in fear, but in shock. Then, from the blackness of the Barrow, a new sound began. It was not a thrum. It was not a whisper. It was a deep,
slow groan, a sound of stone, of earth, of something vast and impossibly ancient, having just been woken up from a very long, very deep, and very cold sleep. The ground beneath Eamon's feet shuddered violently. "You woke them," the chorus from Finn's mouth rasped, a new sound in its voice, a sound of pure, unadulterated terror. The groan was not a sound. It was the vibration of the world tearing its own throat. It rose from beneath Eamon, from the very bedrock of the county. The entire hill, the Knokine on Tosta, shuddered, not with a tremor, but with a slow, deliberate, muscular contraction. The earth bunched, like a sleeper shifting under a mountain of blankets. Eamon was thrown from his knees, landing hard on his chest. The mud of the path was vibrating so hard, his vision blurred, his teeth rattling in his skull. The ring of villagers on the path below had frozen. Their heads, as one, turned from Eamon and swiveled with a stiff, ratcheting motion toward the summit, toward the breach. "No!" the collective mind screamed, but it was no longer a command. It was a wail, a single, unified, desperate plea. "Quiet! Go back! Sleep! It is not time!" The thing that was Finn, the vessel of the collective's will, was no longer focused on Eamon. It was on its hands and knees at the edge of the breach, its raw, bloody fingers clawing at the earth, trying to push the dirt and stones back into the hole. It was a gesture of pure, abject panic. It was trying to close the door Eamon had just kicked open.
"Too warm," the chorus rasped from its mouth. But the voices were breaking, fracturing, losing their harmony. "You woke them! You woke!" A second, deeper groan tore through the hill. This time, it was accompanied by a sound Eamon knew, the shriek of stone shearing against stone. A massive fissure, black and jagged, split the crest of the Barrow, running from the peak down toward the dig site. It was not a neat crack. It was a wound ripping the ancient mound open. And from that wound, a new sensation billowed out. Not cold. It was a heat, a dry, suffocating, ancient heat. A heat that smelled of dust, of crushed bone, of spices he couldn't name, and something else. Something organic and impossibly old. Like the air from a crypt that had been sealed not for centuries, but for eons. Eamon felt a new mind, or minds, touch his. They were not the cold, sterile, communal us of the collective. These were singular. They were vast, ancient, and furious. They were the minds of kings. Vast, arrogant, and utterly inhuman consciousnesses that had been sleeping, dreaming of their own lost, sun-scorched empires. The collective had been the ice, the stillness, the quiet. These were the fire, the original fire. Eamon finally understood. The Barrow wasn't a tomb or a sanctuary, it was a prison. And the collective, the cold entities, had been the insulation, a living blanket of psychic cold poured in to keep the ancient, burning ones dormant. He hadn't just woken the prisoners, he had just boiled away the coolant. "We cannot hold," the collective shrieked, the panic reaching a deafening crescendo in his skull. "It burns! The fire! The old fire! We flee!" A sound like 1,000 wet sheets being ripped apart echoed in his mind. The thing that was Finn went completely rigid. Its back arched, its mouth opened in a silent scream. The milky white film over its eyes dissolved, revealing Finn's own blue eyes, wide and staring, but now dead.
utterly, finally dead. The body toppled over, a marionette with its strings cut, and lay still in the mud. Down the path, the circle of villagers collapsed. One by one, as if a switch had been thrown, they simply fell. Seamus crumpled into the mud. Mrs. O'Malley went down like a sack of grain. Their bodies, their houses, were now empty. The cold was gone. The collective, in its terror, had fled, abandoning its vessels, abandoning the hill, abandoning him. The silence was absolute. No thrumming, no whispers. Only the groaning of the hill and the dry, ancient heat pouring from the fissure. Eamon was alone. He was alone with the mud, the lantern, a dozen unconscious or dead villagers, and a prison he had just broken wide open. He pushed himself to his feet, his body one giant ache. He looked at the black, gaping wound in the earth. The air was thick with the smell of dust and power. From the depths of the new, raw fissure, something moved. It wasn't a body. It was a shadow, a ripple in the air, a distortion in the heat haze. And a voice entered his mind. It was not a chorus. It was a single, imperious, and terribly alive thought. It was like dry sand sliding over obsidian, and it was amused. A warm thing. Good. We have been cold for so long, and we are so very hungry. The amusement in that voice was worse than the cold, sterile hunger. This was an arrogance that had slept for millennia, a predator's casual confidence. The dry, burning heat that billowed from the fissure was no longer just a sensation. It was a presence. It carried the scent of crushed minerals, sun-baked earth, and something like charred meat. Eamon's body, already pushed past every limit, refused to move. He was a creature of damp and cold, of peat smoke and rain. This was the antithesis. This was the desert sun, a devouring, absolute fire. We remember this. The voice of sand and heat slid into his mind again. It was tasting the air. Tasting him. This shape. This language. You are new. You small. What are you? Eamon whispered, the question absurd. He was covered in mud, his own warmth feeling fragile and pathetic in the face of this ancient, baking power. The shadow in the fissure began to rise. It was not a solid thing. It was a column of shimmering distortion, a pillar of dust and heat that coiled out of the earth like a serpent made of air. It had no face, no eyes, but he felt its attention, a terrible, crushing weight turned fully upon him. We are what you saved. We are the ones the ice tried to forget. And you are the one who broke the prison, a servant, a key. The voice paused, and the amusement returned, sharper, hotter. A sacrifice. No, I didn't mean to, Eamon stammered, pushing himself backward, his hands sliding in the wet, cold mud. The contrast was agonizing, the cold earth beneath him, the furnace blast from the hill. You are a morsel, the hot voice purred, a small, bright spark, a taste of the world you have just given back to us. The shimmering column flowed. It moved over the raw edge of the fissure, gliding over the mud. Where it passed, the wet earth sizzled. Steam rose in its wake, a hiss that sounded horribly like a sigh of pleasure. It was moving toward him. He was going to die. He was going to be burned. He squeezed his eyes shut, but the heat, the presence, stopped. Eamon opened one eye, his body trembling violently. The pillar of hot air had halted. It was looking away from him. It had turned its vast, invisible attention down the slope. It had seen the bodies, the dozen empty vessels lying in the mud where the cold had abandoned them. Aha! The thought was a soft, sibilant rush of hot wind. Empty houses, still warm. The ice left them for us. A new, dreadful understanding dawned on Eamon. The cold wanted houses to make quiet. These wanted houses to burn. Eamon watched, paralyzed in a new kind of horror, as the shimmering column of dust and heat glided past him, ignoring him now as if he were a piece of grit, utterly irrelevant. It flowed down the path, its movement fluid and impossibly fast. It stopped, hovering over the nearest body, Seamus, the publican. "This will," the voice mused in his head, "for a start." The heat shape descended, enveloping Seamus's unmoving form in its shimmering, hazy aura. Seamus's body didn't twitch. It didn't tremble. It convulsed. A single violent spasm, as if 1,000 volts had been driven through it. A sound tore from the publican's throat, not a groan, but a dry, rasping roar. The sound of a wildfire catching in dry tinder. Seamus's body snapped upright. It rose to its feet, not with the stiff, puppet-like motion of the cold, but with a fluid, terrible, inhuman speed. His eyes snapped open. They were not milky. They were burning. The pupils, the iris, the white, all were gone. They were replaced by two swirling, miniature vortexes of orange, flickering fire. The thing that wore Seamus turned its head, the neck cracking, not from stiffness, but from the power contorting it. It looked at its new hands, flexing the fingers, which were smoking, the moisture on the skin hissing and steaming away. Then it turned. It looked up the hill, directly at Eamon. And it smiled. The lips peeled back, the teeth already drying, cracking in the heat. "Warm," the voice of Seamus rasped, but it was layered, a new, fiery resonance beneath the sand and dust whisper. "Yes, this is much better now." The new Seamus looked over the square at the other fallen bodies. For the others. Down in the square, the bodies of the villagers, one by one, began to twitch. The ground mist, which had clung to the cobblestones like a cold shroud, was now a roiling sea of steam. One by one, the bodies rose.
It was not a resurrection. It was an ignition. Mrs. O'Malley's form snapped from the mud, her damp nightgown drying in an instant, smoking at the hem before bursting into a low, blue flame. Donnell, the young postman, rose as if pulled by a string, his head lolling for a moment before his spine cracked, straightening with inhuman rigidity. His eyes, like Seamus's, were twin pits of burning coal. They didn't speak. They didn't need to. The air itself was their voice, a low, powerful roaring sound like a forge's bellows filled the square, emanating from their open, steaming mouths. The heat was a physical blow, even from the top of the hill. Eamon's terror, which had been a sharp, cold spike, was now a dull, baking, oppressive weight. He had been a fool. He thought he was fighting a localized, parasitic cold. He had, in his arrogance, shattered the containment unit on a furnace of gods. The thing wearing Seamus's skin, its clothes now charred, its hair burned away to reveal a cracked, blistering scalp, took a step forward, planting itself in the center of the square. It raised one smoking hand. The other figures, 8,
10, 12 of them stopped their twitching and turned their burning gaze toward it. They stood in a perfect, silent, disciplined circle, awaiting orders. The Seamus thing looked up the hill. Its burning eyes found Eamon. The distance was meaningless. He felt the gaze like a brand on his skin. "The key," its voice echoed, not just in Eamon's mind, but in the air itself. It was the sound of a forest fire speaking. The little, warm match that lit the house. It laughed. The sound was a horror, a dry, crackling, tearing sound, like a log splitting in a bonfire. I don't. Eamon's voice was a dry croak. His throat was already raw from the superheated air. "You did," the fiery entity rasped, and it began to walk, fluidly, powerfully, toward the path up the hill. "You opened the ice house. They kept us cold. They made us sleep." The Seamus thing paused, tilting its head, its burning eyes a mockery of curiosity. "We do not like to sleep." It took another step. The other burning figures moved with it, a phalanx of living flame, their feet setting the damp grass of the path ablaze as they advanced. Eamon scrambled backward, his mind hollowed out by the scale of his error. He looked behind him at the great black fissure in the Barrow. The heat pouring from it was a solid wall, a physical barrier. The air shimmered. He was trapped. The burning, resurrected village was in front of him, and the gates of a literal hell were at his back. "What do you want?" he yelled, his words sounding thin and pointless. "Want?" The Seamus thing paused, 10 yards from him. The heat was scorching, blistering the skin on his face. "The cold ones wanted quiet. They wanted to hide. We..." It raised its arms, its burning hands gesturing to the dark, waiting, living world beyond the village. "Want everything." The burning eyes of the entity narrowed. It looked at Eamon, then at the hole behind him. "The gate is open, but it is slow. We are many, and these..." It gestured to its own burning, cracking body. "These houses are weak. They burn too fast." A new dreadful realization. These weren't permanent possessions. They were fuel. The entities were consuming the bodies, burning them from the inside out. Seamus's form was already blackening, the flesh splitting, revealing a glowing, incandescent core. "We need more. We need the world." "I can't help you," Eamon screamed, his mind finally breaking. "I'm just one. I'm just a man." "Yes," the Seamus thing agreed. Its voice was almost gentle, a soft, dry hiss. "But you are the key. You listened. You heard the cold. You felt our heat. You are open." It smiled, a fissure of fire in its blackened face. "You will not be a house. You will be our voice. You will be our herald. You will go to the other warm places, and you will tell them." The Seamus thing raised its hand, pointing a single, burning, char-black finger at him. "That the sun has risen." The other figures spread out, forming a semicircle. They were herding him, not toward the village, but away from it, away from the Barrow. They were letting him go. "No," Eamon's mind couldn't process it. "You're letting me go?" "Go," the fiery voice commanded. "Go, run, tell the others, the warm ones. Tell them we are free, and we are coming to warm them all." It was a trap. It had to be. But then the shamus thing turned its back on him. It and the other burning figures walked, not to him, but to the summit. They gathered around the great fissure, a circle of priests at a new, terrible altar. They raised their arms, and they roared. A column of fire, dust, and shadow erupted from the Barrow, shooting 1,000 feet into the night sky, a beacon that would be seen for 100 miles. A signal. Eamon was forgotten. He was irrelevant. He was just the messenger. He stumbled, fell, and scrambled to his feet. He ran. He ran from the burning hill, his lungs searing, his mind a wasteland. He ran, not from the cold, but from a fire that would consume the world, a fire he had set. He did not look back. He ran, and as he crested the last hill, he heard them, carried on the hot, dry wind, the sound of the other villages in the valleys below, beginning to awaken. He was the last cold thing, running for his life in a world that was, moment by moment, being set ablaze. And he was the only one who knew the sleeping, burning kings had returned. And he had been the one to ring the dinner bell.